Thank you very much, everyone. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces, and it's a privilege to be among such an amazing group of scholars. The topic was given by the organizers, and I'm thinking whether or not I will keep that for the article that we are planning to propose. But I'll talk a bit more broadly about religion, human rights, and populism in Brazil. Of course, I just have like 10 minutes, so it's just some short notes about that, and I'm happy to answer questions later. So I'd like to start with a narrative that illustrates what is happening in Brazil. On August 11th, the Christian Congregation of Brazil, a Pentecostal church that has never really engaged or has not traditionally engaged with politics, circulated the leadership of the church elaborated a document where they said that their members should not vote in candidates or parties contrary to Christian values or parties that propose the deconstruction of families in the model instructed in the Word of God, that is, marriage between a man and a woman. A member of the church argued with the leader and said that the church was not a place to discuss politics, said it was a place to talk about God. Police officer who was attending the same service did not like the interjection of the member of the church, and 2 weeks after the event, he shot the person's brother who had spoken against the pastor. The brother was going to church to play in the band, church band, and still has his has undergone 7 surgeries since he's alive, but has a lot of open wounds. And I believe that these open wounds symbolize what has become of Brazil. Fortunately, these incidents have been isolated. It could have been a lot worse, given the tensions and polarization that Brazil has never seen in history. But it seems that situation is a bit calmer now. And how did it happen is still puzzling. I'm still trying to find answers. Until last week, there were still protests of people arguing that the election was fraudulent. 2 days ago, the army issued a report. 3 days ago, the army issued a report saying that there was no fraud in the election, although the system is not perfect. So it left some arguments open for discussion there. But the institutions were strong enough and survived. And one of the concepts that we need to understand is the shift in religious demographics. So Brazil went from 30 years ago having about 80% of Catholics in the country to having 50% now. And this shift in absolute numbers means that 50 million people left Catholicism or stopped identifying as Catholics and became either evangelical Christians or agnostics, atheists, decided not to declare any religion. So this shift was significant, and evangelicals were a minority, quickly gained power. So the analysis is done by our colleague from about Russia is very similar to Brazil, a church that was somewhat mocked, not repressed to the same extent, got a lot of power quickly. And it started imposing its will on the majority of the population. And they used the language of human rights whenever it fit them. They used the language of religion or belief when it benefited them, let's say for tax exemption, for getting access to cable channels, all those things, which is due, which they have the right to have. But when it comes to morals, LGBT rights, then they use the majoritarian view, the Catholic view, that this is a matter of tradition and culture. Therefore, they never lose. They use the language of human rights when it suits them. They use the language of culture when it suits them as well. And populism is not just a matter of, like, it's something that happened in Brazil. We've seen like a lot of examples, but it's also happening all of, like, in the whole Latin America. One scholar said that Latin America is the continent of populism, and he's right. Populism has been present since the 1930s throughout the continent, and it's both left and right. That's very important. Like, it's apolitical in a way. Lula was a populist leftist president. Bolsonaro was a populist far-right president. And the fact that Latin America keeps going back and forth, like between political groups, right, left, that has provided some safety for civil society, religious groups who are in favor of human rights to, promote human rights, to defend the rights of those in need. But but the system is breaking a little bit, because one of the reasons, the common reasons for populism, is a weak rule of law and weaker institutions. That was not the case in the US, and that's not the case in Brazil either. And we are seeing that. So while populists, let's say in Nicaragua during the Ortega government, are jailing Catholic priests because they are, like, claiming and protecting the human rights of individuals in the country, in Brazil, the populist movement decided to use as scapegoats communists or these other dictatorial regimes, while at the same time using religion as a way to convince people that that's the only legitimate government, at least a godly government, even if its leader, like Bolsonaro, has no morals whatsoever. Everyone knows that he's a horrible person. He said, he's in favor of torture. He said that he, like, wouldn't rape a woman because she was too ugly, like things like that. And evangelicals, who have historically been very moralist, are unfortunately backing him up. So what are the lessons there? It's very difficult to understand, but I'll just wrap up with a few questions that I still have and that I want to explore more. One is the role of the elites. That's another populist approach. Like, populist governments are always voicing against this populist, this elite group. So it's the power of the people against this elite group. Bolsonaro and Trump, and the connections between Brazil and the US are obvious, because Brazil imitates a lot of what the US does. It was government for the rich throughout, in the whole mandate. The rule of law is hard to understand. The role of the media is very difficult to place right now. And the role of religious leaders and how the politics of identity and belonging, as well as this politics of spiritual warfare, have played to support Bolsonaro and to, again, almost led to a second win for him and his allies. So it's a very complicated matter, and thank you so much for the other inputs. I want to hear more from you.